It doesn't show up in the money first. It shows up in you. You start thinking before you speak. You soften things that didn't need to be softened. You hesitate before pushing back. And they don't. Not because they're trying to control you, but because they don't have to. And that's when it shifts. Not when the money changes, when you start adjusting and they don't. That's the moment the balance is already gone. And once you notice it, you start seeing it everywhere. Not in big moments, in small ones. They make a decision and you hesitate before questioning it. They suggest something and you go along with it a little faster than you used to. You start choosing your words more carefully, not to avoid conflict, but to make sure you're understood the right way. And it doesn't feel like a big change. It feels controlled, like you're just being more aware. But it keeps happening. You explain more, you justify more, you think about how something will sound before you say it. And at the same time, they don't seem to be doing any of that. They speak directly. They don't second-guess themselves the same way. They don't adjust their tone or timing. And that difference starts to stand out. Not all at once, but in a pattern. You're the one managing how things come across. You're the one making sure nothing gets misinterpreted. And over time, that changes how the interaction feels. What used to feel equal starts feeling slightly uneven. What used to feel natural starts feeling controlled. And it's hard to explain because nothing obvious caused it, but something did. Because once one person starts adjusting more than the other, the balance isn't just shifting in behavior, it's shifting in something deeper. And that's where the dynamic starts changing, even if neither of you says it out loud. What's actually changing here isn't just behavior. It's how much each of you has to think about the relationship. The more you feel dependent on it, the more your brain starts working to protect it. You start scanning for problems. You notice tone more. You pay attention to small shifts that wouldn't have mattered before. And that awareness changes how you act. You become more careful, more deliberate, more focused on keeping things stable. But that effort doesn't stay invisible. It shows up in how you speak, how you respond, and how much you adjust. And the other person doesn't feel the same pressure, so they don't have to do any of that. They're not scanning the same way. They're not calculating the same way. So their behavior stays more natural, while yours becomes more controlled. And that difference is where the imbalance starts forming. You don't even notice you're doing it until you realize they're not doing any of it. Because power in a relationship isn't just about money or decisions. It's about who has to regulate themselves more to keep the connection intact. And once one person starts managing more than the other, the dynamic isn't equal anymore. It's being held in place by one side more than the other, whether either person realizes it or not. Once that difference is there, it doesn't stay small. It repeats, and every time it repeats, it reinforces the same pattern. You adjust a little more, you think a little more, you hold back a little more, and none of it feels dramatic on its own, but together, it starts to add weight, because now the interaction isn't just happening, it's being managed unevenly. You start anticipating reactions before they happen, you respond earlier, you try to keep things from turning into something bigger, and that makes your behavior even more controlled. Meanwhile, the other person continues responding naturally. They don't feel the need to adjust as much, so they don't. And that contrast becomes clearer over time, not in one moment, but across many. You start to feel like you're carrying more of the interaction than you used to, like you're responsible for keeping things steady in a way you weren't before, and they start to feel like they can just exist inside it without thinking about it the same way. And that's where the shift deepens, not through conflict, but through repetition. You adjust, they don't. And that difference keeps repeating, because once one person is investing more effort in maintaining how things feel, the balance isn't just shifting emotionally, it's shifting structurally. And that shift makes every interaction feel slightly uneven, even when nothing is wrong on the surface. As this continues, the roles inside the relationship start changing without being discussed. You become the one who manages how things land, the one who keeps conversations smooth, the one who notices tension early and adjusts before it turns into something bigger. And at first, that can feel like awareness, like you're just being more thoughtful, more intentional. But over time, it shifts into something else. because now you're not just participating in the interaction, you're stabilizing it. And the more you stabilize it, the less the other person has to. They don't need to think ahead the same way. They don't need to adjust their tone or timing. They can be more direct, more relaxed, more themselves. And that difference changes how each of you experiences the relationship. One side becomes more controlled, the other stays more free. And that's where power actually moves, not through control or dominance, but through who has to regulate themselves more to keep things steady. Because the person who has to think more, adjust more, and hold more together is already operating from a position of less power. And once that role settles in, it becomes the default way the dynamic functions, even if neither of you ever talks about it. After a while, the shift stops feeling like something you're doing and starts feeling like who you are in the relationship. You don't just adjust in moments, you expect yourself to. You assume you'll be the one to smooth things out, to think ahead, to keep things from turning into something bigger. And that hesitation builds, not because you're unsure of yourself, but because you've learned that the balance isn't the same anymore, so you adapt to it. You make yourself easier to be around, less reactive, less demanding, more controlled. And from the outside, that can look like maturity, like emotional control, like stability. But internally, it feels different. It feels like you're carrying more of the interaction than you used to, like you're responsible for keeping things steady in a way you weren't before. And the more that feeling builds, the more it shapes how you see yourself inside the dynamic, not as an equal participant, but as the one who has to make it work. This is where it usually gets misunderstood, because what you feel is control, awareness, and effort. It's easy to think you're just being more mature, more thoughtful, more emotionally intelligent, that you're the one keeping things stable while the other person is just more relaxed. And on the surface, that explanation makes sense. But it hides what's actually happening. Because the difference isn't just in personality, it's in pressure. You're adjusting because you feel something at risk. They're not adjusting because they don't feel that same risk. And that's what creates the gap. Not that one person is better at handling relationships, but that one person has more to lose, so their behavior changes to protect it. And when you interpret that change as simply being better or trying harder, you miss the reason it started. You start believing the dynamic is normal or even healthy because it's not loud or chaotic. But underneath that, the balance has already shifted. One person is holding more of the interaction in place than the other. And as long as that goes unnoticed, it keeps reinforcing itself because you keep adjusting and they don't need to. So it doesn't feel like the shift started with money. It feels like the shift started with you. You adjusted a little more, you thought a little more, you held back a little more. And over time, that became normal, not because anyone asked you to, but because the situation shaped it. And that's what makes it hard to see, because nothing about it looks extreme. It looks controlled. It looks stable. It even looks like you're doing the right thing. But underneath that, the balance has already changed, because power in a relationship isn't about who earns more. It's about who has to regulate themselves more to keep things steady. And once you're the one thinking, adjusting, and holding it together more than the other person, the dynamic isn't equal anymore. It's being held in place by one side more than the other, whether either person realizes it or not. And that's why you feel it, even when you can't fully explain it. Because it's not the money that changed the relationship, it's what the money changed in you. And once that happens, the power has already moved.